There is a very specific kind of pain that comes from being raised by a narcissistic parent. It's confusing because from the outside, your childhood might have looked pretty normal. You had a home, maybe you had food on the table, maybe bills could be paid in a timely manner. Maybe people even described your parent as charming or impressive. But inside the house, things were very different. Something was always off. The emotional atmosphere was unpredictable. Love felt conditional. Approval felt fragile and fleeting. And as a child, you learned something very quietly without even realizing it. You learned that love meant adapting yourself to someone else's emotional weather. You were very, very young when you first learned that. If they were happy, the house felt safe. If they were angry, everything in your body tightened. If they withdrew, you felt a deep panic you could not even name. You found yourself bracing, never knowing what to expect. Children are not capable of understanding narcissism. They simply internalize it. So instead of thinking, my parent has emotional limitations, the child grows up thinking, something must be wrong with me. Why am I not lovable? Why can't mommy be happy? This is the beginning of complex trauma. CPTSD doesn't always come from one catastrophic event. Sometimes it comes from thousands of small emotional injuries that can accumulate over time. Being criticized, being compared, being dismissed, being loved only when you performed correctly? No. You become hyper attuned to other people's moods. You become skilled at reading the room. You become the peacemaker, the caretaker, the overachiever, the one who compensates. Not because those things are your personality, but because they were your survival strategy. And here's the most heartbreaking part. When you grow up inside that environment, your nervous system learns that chaos and love belong together. So when you become an adult and you begin dating, lo and behold, you don't necessarily feel drawn to people who are calm. You feel drawn to people who feel familiar, like home when you were growing up. And familiarity is so very powerful. Your body recognizes the emotional pattern before your mind does. You might meet someone who is charismatic, magnetic, funny, emotionally intense. At first, the connection feels electric, but slowly something begins to happen. The criticism appears, underhanded comments, slight little jabs. The emotional distance appears, the confusion appears, and suddenly you find yourself back in the same emotional position you occupied as a child, trying to earn love. trying to prove your worth, trying to heal someone who has no interest in healing, trying to fix a connection that continues to injure you. Many survivors of narcissistic parenting experience this very pattern, not because they are weak or flawed, not because they like toxic people. No, none of those things, but because the nervous system seeks what it recognizes, even if it's harmful. It's as if the nervous system, soul, it's trying to resolve an unfinished story. I know this pattern intimately. For many years, I believed that if I just loved harder, communicated better, became more understanding, more empathetic, more patient, the relationship would stabilize. Somehow, some way, if I could just be enough, it would stabilize. What I didn't understand at the time was that I wasn't only loving a partner. I was unconsciously trying to heal my childhood. And that realization was devastating. Because eventually you have to face a truth that breaks your heart. Some people cannot meet you in the emotional depth you are offering. That's it. They just simply cannot do it. And it's not because you're asking for too much. They simply do not have the emotional architecture for depth. The capacity is simply not there. When you grow up with narcissistic dynamics, your empathy becomes huge. You can feel nuance. You can sense pain in others. You can hold compassion even when someone harms you. But empathy without boundaries can become self-abandonment, self-annihilation, self-erasure. And this is where the healing work begins. Healing CPTSD is not just about leaving painful relationships. It's about retraining the nervous system slowly, gently, and consistently. It's not about rushing through it or a quick fix. It's also about learning that peace is not boredom. It's about learning that love does not require you to shrink. It's about recognizing that someone else's inability to love you properly was never a reflection of your worth. This work is not easy. It is slow, can feel tedious. It will ask you to grieve things that are incredibly painful to admit. You will grieve the parent you needed but did not ever have. You grieve the relationships that mirrored those early wounds. You grieve the years you spent trying to earn love that should have been freely given. There were moments in my own healing journey where the grief felt unbearable. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And sitting with that raw emotion is very challenging, but very doable. you will realize how many choices were shaped by survival instead of self-worth. And these are very tough things to face. But something beautiful begins to happen as the healing deepens. You start to recognize emotional safety. You begin to feel the difference between intensity and intimacy. You stop confusing chaos with passion. You become capable of something that once felt impossible. Choosing differently. And when that happens, something in your nervous system relaxes. For the first time in your life, love begins to feel steady, safe, comfortable, not dramatic, not consuming, not destabilizing, not confusing, just steady. And that steadiness can feel unfamiliar at first, but it is the kind of love your nervous system has been searching for all along. You just didn't realize it yet. If you grew up with a narcissistic parent, I want you to hear this. You are not alone. You did not deserve to have your first bully be your parent. The patterns you learned were survival strategies. They are not character flaws. You did the very best you could at that time. Your empathy is not weakness. Your sensitivity is not brokenness. And the fact that you are willing to examine these patterns already places you on a very different path than the one you inherited. Healing from childhood trauma is one of the bravest journeys a human being can take. And I'm so very proud of you. This work requires honesty. It requires boundaries that you may not be accustomed to setting and enforcing. And sometimes it requires walking away from people you deeply hoped would change. But on the other side of that work, there is something extraordinary waiting for you. It is a calm, fulfilling love that does not ask you to be less. It is a life where love is not something you fight for. It is a life where you no longer have to perform to be valued. You no longer have to self-abandon to be with a partner. You will have a life where your nervous system finally understands what safety feels like. And if you are somewhere in the middle of that journey right now, I want you to know something. I see you. I understand. You are not behind. You are right on time. You are not broken. You are relearning what love actually is. And this takes time. Be gentle with yourself. Be patient. This is one of the most sacred forms of healing there is. I'm Kat Grace. I appreciate you being here. Until next time, namaste.